Hello, my name is Jonathan McCormick. I am a PhD candidate for Golden Gate Baptist Theological Seminary. This lecture is for Church History 1, Founding of the Church to the Reformation, and this lecture is covering the Donatist controversy. Donatism was a North African religious movement beginning in 313 through the 7th or 8th century. Donatism was revolving around the acceptance of those who gave up the scriptures or sacrificed to the emperor. These people were called traditores or betrayers. Specifically, Donatus of Casanegra opposed the ordination of Cecilian of Carthage by Felix of Apundaga. Felix of Apundaga was a traditor. Thomas Oden said, Africa was the scene of the worst excesses of the Valerian persecution, which beheaded Cyprian in Carthage in AD 257, and the Diocletian persecution in AD 303 to 305 that beheaded Peter of Alexandria. The persecution under Diocletian was done by Roman edicts and officials. Therefore, Donatism had its primary conflict with Christians connected to the Church of Rome. This conflict began in large part after a meeting was convened in Rome to determine the legitimacy of Cecilian's ordination. After this council, the Donatists left the church. There really are four intersecting issues that revolve around the Donatist controversy. They intersect and influence how people understood what it meant to be a Donatist or a Catholic Christian in North Africa. Two of these issues are social-political issues, and two of these issues are theological. The first issue we should address is the economic issue. The Donatist controversy can be seen as a conflict between rich urban people and poor rural people. In 410, Alaric sacks Rome. This is the great defeat of the Roman Empire by the barbarian invasion. It took some time for the barbarians to make it to Rome, and Rome knew that it needed to defend itself and the provinces against the barbarian invasion. In order to build a strong military, you need to have taxes. In order to get taxes, you get it from the outlying areas. So Rome would tax the provinces. The provincial authorities in the cities would tax the rural areas outlying the major cities. This is fine, except if you are a poor rural person who does not work in coin but lives in a barter system. Geoffrey Waldrop observed that the rural people tended to be Donatists, and the Catholics tended to live in cities. One of the cities that is significant in this debate is a city named Hippo Regius. This is the city which Augustine comes from. Augustine will be one of the great thinkers of Catholic Christianity and one of the major opponents to Donatist Christianity. William Friend observes that Hippo Regius is blocked by rapids. The coastal settlements were sited for defense and not for the purposes of trading with the interior. If you cannot trade to get coin, you cannot trade to get coin to pay your taxes. This led to the rising of a group known as the Circumcellions. They're called such because they lived near the tombs of the martyrs. They fought for the Church of the Martyrs. When they read their Bibles, they said, "He who lives by the sword will die by the sword." So they used clubs to get around this biblical prohibition. And they stood with the Donatists. They weren't a one-to-one group. However, as the Donatists split from the Catholic Church, they grew together. Eventually, there were Donatist bishops leading bands of Circumcellions. Why is this an issue? Because of the close connection between the church and the state, Rome would use some of the funds that it received in taxes to build basilicas and churches for the Catholic Church. The Circumcellions, on more than one occasion, invaded a basilica, removed the bishop, and placed a Donatist bishop in control of this basilica that they believed had been built on the taxes of these Donatist Christians. Second, the Donatist controversy is a conflict between Rome and Africa. In the council that met in Rome to decide whether they would accept or reject the ordination of Cecilian, there were 15 bishops present. There are other councils that relate to this, and the numbers get fairer in the other events. But this first meeting includes 15 men. All 15 are European. None of them are African. Why does this matter? We need to think about the historical relationship between Rome and Carthage. There had been what were called the Punic Wars, 3 of them specifically. Between the First and the Second Punic War, Rome took 2/3 of the grain harvest of Carthage and the surrounding areas to feed the cities in Italy. The urban centers tended to forget about the difficulties of the occupation of Rome and the high taxes and genuine plundering from these wars. But the people in the country did not forget the taxes. They did not forget the Punic Wars. So who orchestrated the Punic Wars? The Romans. Who led the persecution of Christians? Who was the one asking for sacrifices to the emperor? The Romans. Who was now supporting the laxist positions? The idea that you can come back into the church without being rebaptized or going through penance. This was the Romans. So the Donatists did not simply see this as a doctrinal division, but saw this as an unfair co-opting of the religious authority by a foreign power. J.E. Maringer says that on issues concerning heresies, the Donatist churches and the Catholic churches were usually in agreement, but when power struggles were at center stage, the friendly relationship was strained. This was primarily due to the African bishops' love for their African churches and its capital, Carthage. Again, the Circumcellions have a part to play in this. The Circumcellions received worship practices that were pagan. They liked to feast around the feasts of the saints of the martyrs. And at their feasts, they would drink and allegedly had orgies. This was condemned by the Catholic Church in their veneration of the saints. Now, there was some division within the Donatist movement. There was a group called the Rogerists, who leave the Donatist movement at an uprising against the Roman state by the Donatists and the Circumcellions. But one of the things in the background of this schism among the Donatists is this rejection of this form of worship. As an aside, remember that Augustine is one of the great figures speaking about the Donatist controversy from a Catholic perspective. In his book, The Confessions, he talks frequently about his mother, Monica. Monica is one of the great heroes of the Confessions. She prays for Augustine. Her piety is without peer. Yet there's one passage, and as far as I can find, one, where Augustine does not speak highly of Monica. In fact, he condemns her practice. This is in Book 6, Chapter 2. It says that when she brought gruel, bread, and wine to the shrines of the saints, as she had been accustomed to do in Africa, she was stopped by the doorkeeper. When she learned that the bishop had forbidden this, she accepted it so reverently and obediently that I myself was amazed how easily she became an incriminator of her own custom rather than an adjudicator of this prohibition. In this passage, Augustine is portraying his mother, an African Punic Christian, as putting aside her practices because it is not how the Romans did it. She is presented as a sort of model for what the Donatists ought to do. They should set aside these unsavory African practices and adopt Roman worship. Beyond this, there are two theological issues that we need to pay attention to. And these are the issues that come down to us in our doctrine. The Donatist controversy was a soteriological controversy. North Africa was, by and large, a place where the idea of sacramentalism had won. When I say sacramentalism, I mean that part of what saves you is properly going through these rites, through baptism, through penance, through the Lord's Supper. Each of these things is a way God gives grace to those who do not know fully what it is like to follow Christ. It regenerates the person. This leads to a problem. What if I'm doing a bad sacrament? What if I'm baptized and the bishop is not a legitimate bishop? He's lapsed. The Donatists said if you wanted to return to the church after being lapsed, you had to be rebaptized. And you could not return if you had refused martyrdom. This is fine during the time of the of the persecution. If you deny Christ, you do not sacrifice to the emperor, you simply go back out and offer incense. You go back out and you refuse to offer incense. If you refuse to offer incense and you are killed, you're a martyr. If you survive, you have gone through what you need to do to be restored to the church. You did not have this same thing at the time of the Donatist controversy. If you have no persecution, you have no means of restoring holiness to your bishops. This leads to an ecclesiological controversy. Cyprian said, "You cannot have God for your father if you do not have the church for your mother." This means you can only be saved if you're connected to the true church. But this means, what is a true church? And Cyprian and the rest of the North African theologians, Tertullian and Augustine with the Catholic Church, but there's also a leader within the Donatist movement called Parmenian. We know of his writings mainly through Augustine and Optatus. All of them seem to agree that there is a true church where there is a bishop offering the sacraments. God has given what are called dotes, gifts to the church. These are spiritual gifts that empower the ecclesial structure to give the sacraments effectively to the people who need it in the church. A lapsed bishop does not have the dotes. Therefore, a lapsed church does not have the dotes and is not a true church. What happens to the Donatist movement? There is a letter from Pope Gregory to the bishops in North Africa and to some of the churches in the East that mentions the Donatist movement. There later is a letter coming from North Africa during the time of the Islamic invasions asking for entrance into Italy and other safe territories away from the Muslim invasion. This list includes heretical groups that we know of that were in existence in North Africa at the time and beforehand. The Donatist movement is not listed in this list of heretical groups appealing for asylum. So either the Donatist movement died out, was absorbed back into the Catholic Church, or was destroyed by the Muslim invasion. And it's not completely clear which happened. So if the Donatist movement is no longer a movement, why should we study this? Partially so we can learn how we should and should not deal with these different issues, whether it's economic, racial, or political, ecclesiological, and soteriological. We can learn from the writings of these great church leaders. But we also need to think about what the Donatists were. When we enter our discussion of the Reformation next semester, you will find there are claims of being heirs of the Donatists and accusations of being heirs of the Donatists. And being an heir of the Donatist led to persecution during the Reformation. In order to understand that time frame, we really do need to understand the writing of history and the understanding of who the Donatists were, both the self-understanding of the Donatists and the Catholic understanding when they placed these accusations on schismatic groups. Hopefully you found this interesting. If you'd like to study the Donatist movement more, please see the paper attached. There will be a bibliography at the end to help you get started doing some of your research, and a timeline. Sometimes it can get a little fuzzy figuring out who is Parmenian and who's Optatus and what's this council. Hopefully this timeline will help you keep track of what the Donatist movement was about, when it rose, and when it ended. Thank you, and enjoy.